to state your name, position you're running for, and give us a brief bio, and we'll start breaking into questions at any time.
Sure.
Why don't we start with Shanice?
Awesome. My name is Shanice Brittany Clark. I am running for the Portland Public School Board Zone 2. I'm a Portland educator, community organizer, and I am dedicated and dedicated my life to serving students. I received an educational degree in educational leadership, and I co-created a resource center at Portland State University that aims to support Black student retention. So onboarding that department was carried out through various strategies, but through a commitment to building virtual and in-person channels for participation from students, staff, faculty, community members, organizational leaders, and various folks to inform what we would name the space, what our mission would be, what our vision would be, and our foundation. And that's leadership that I would bring forward to the Portland Public School Board as we connect to issues of governance and policy making, and who is consulted with and informed. So I also help shape educational policy and regularly participate in student engagement programs that interface with PPS students, families, staff, and advocates for that community. I'm also a lover of comic books. I'm a comic book enthusiast, and I am an active member of a teachers union through my role at PSU, and there I am right now helping to co-create these sets of principles that will guide us through a collective bargaining process. And outside of that, we are really engaged with trying to advocate for basic needs and resources that are impacted by cuts. So that is a lens and perspective that I would bring to the school board. And I'm running because I see that the voices of youth and students aren't centered in the ways that they need to be on the Portland Public School Board, and running to improve the outcomes for students by connecting those experiences with educators who are on the front lines, working with Portland students to build a vision for true community-oriented and centered governance.
Let me, if I can just break in for a second, ask you, I think you've come to Portland fairly recently. Tell us about where did you grow up and how did you get here?
Yeah, I come from a working class Jamaican family, and we bounced around a little bit, and I spent time in Boston, and there I actually didn't complete high school. So I experienced a number of hardships when I was younger. My family dealt with addiction and loss and a number of different things that just disrupted my experience. And I came to Portland as it related to connections that I've made later in my educational journey with Black students and Black student advocacy. And students made a list of demands at Portland State and asked for increased staff, increased retention support, and creating a task force and various efforts to do strategic work. And I really connected and felt empowered through the work that was happening there, and moved to help co-create and lift up the work that was happening. So I connect my experience in Portland now to be rooted to the historical experiences of Black people in this community, and as it relates to my own experience. And I know many Portland students deal with these things, and the recent audit showed that 76% of Portland students who don't complete high school come from low-income families, and that's a key space and thing that I think the district should be focusing on to improve student outcomes through strategic efforts that I can share more about in a little bit.
Have you run for public office before?
I've never run for public office before. I'm currently in a candidate training program called Emerge Oregon, and getting supports from different folks. So without that, I couldn't be doing this. But I have my decision to run has been truly motivated through my connections and conversations with PPS communities, and my own pathway before running for office became a thing was thinking about pursuing a PhD in educational administration and doing policy work. But I think this type of role and function is a lot more, can lead to quicker results when folks have the right tools, strategies, and experiences at the table.
Okay, great, thank you. Michelle?
Sure. So my name is Michelle DePass. I'm running for Portland Public Schools Zone 2. I'm running as a PPS grad, a PPS mom, and from a family of four generations of PPS teachers. I grew up in a lot of places, but largely in Northeast Portland. Also went to school in Caracas and Guadalajara and Washington, D.C. when I was growing up. I am motivated to run because of not only the recent audit, which is largely the same audit I've seen most of my adult life. I currently work for the Portland Housing Bureau in community engagement and in the director's office. And I've had years of experience here in Portland working in various capacities professionally, but also have a lot of volunteer experience in the classrooms for the past 30 years. Teaching business basics to 5th and 8th graders, leading Girl Scouts Beyond Bars through a educational recreational program, leading low-income and immigrant children on outdoor expeditions, teaching algebra to formerly incarcerated youth, and of course volunteering in my own children's classrooms, PTA, classroom chaperone, middle school chaperone. And so I have a lot of experience in the schools and in and around the schools. And as a single parent, this is an extension of the service I've already given to Portland Public Schools and to the children in our community.
You said you've seen the same audit, or essentially the same audit, a number of times. Why do you think things haven't changed for the better in Portland Public Schools?
Well, institutional racism plays out in Portland Public Schools just like it does in every other institution everywhere, not just in Portland. I think that a lot of factors, there's not a single factor that plays into that, but the bottom line is the system works very well, and it works just as it's intended to work for some Portland kids, and it does not work very well for others. Those others are largely low immigrant, Black and brown students with disabilities, gender binary students. These are the students that are not succeeding, graduating at lower rates, and we know that. We see it in the data.
How long have you worked for the Housing Bureau?
I've been there about 4.5 years.
Before that?
Prior to that, I worked at Metro. I managed the Minority Women Emerging Small Business Program. I made a shift right before that. I was in the energy industry. I worked for Energy Trust of Oregon, the Home Builders Association of Oregon, the Cadmus Group, which is an energy efficiency consultancy.
What did you do for the home builders?
The Home Builders, I developed their green building program. It was a contract position through the Energy Trust of Oregon. And a very interesting experience.
Work with John Chandler in that capacity?
Yes.
How was that?
Challenging.
Why?
When I quit that job, I didn't give any notice. Mm-hmm. I was charged with working 1 day a week in Salem, and I never had a single conversation with anybody I worked with in Salem, professional, nor an email, nor anything. So the program was successful, I think, in that the program's off the ground. We had members of the Home Builders Association that paid to be in the green building kind of concentration, and I have friends that I still see that are home builders from that time. But yeah, it was a very challenging time, partly because due to my being a single parent, and the work hours and conditions working was in Lake Oswego. My kids went to school. It was very hard to manage.
Have you run for office before?
No, I haven't.
So why not?
Well, now, again, because I'm a single parent, I've done all of my volunteer work I've prioritized my time around what I could do. When my kids were little, I could volunteer in their classrooms a couple times a week because I wasn't full-time working. Before I had kids, I can volunteer whenever I wanted to. But this board service right now is an extension of everything I've done. It just looks differently. It's a Tuesday night meeting. It's a committee meeting. I have the time and capacity, and this is the right race at the right time for me.
Well, I'm curious if you could both tell us who either recruited you to run or with whom you had a conversation that convinced you that you should run. Shall I go first with you?
I wasn't necessarily recruited, sort of self-recruited, but again, as an Emerge Oregon alum, 2017, I knew that, the right race can come at the right time in your life. When I read the audit, I was inspired to take action. I have a background of, entire life pretty much of activism. So this is an extension of everything I've done up to this point. After I read the executive summary of the audit, I thought, oh my gosh, what would Charles Jordan do? Charles Jordan, a mentor of mine, he's not here any longer. I worked for him at the Parks Bureau. I managed construction projects for about 9 years. And what would Charles Jordan do? What would Rosa Parks do? What would any leader that I respect do when they read this information that comes out that's disturbing, the lack of supports for Black and Brown students? And so, I self-recruited, but of course I've got a huge circle of people around me, campaign staff, the Emerge Oregon network. I'm connected in very, very many ways as a lifelong Portlander.
What about you, Shanice? What convinced you? What was the catalyst for your canvas?
Absolutely. So over the last couple of years, being in spaces like Black educators gatherings and hearing spaces like sharing the Black Student Success Plan, for example. I've been in community with other PPS educators, and primarily this conversation started with one of my endorsers, Joy Elise Davis, who supports a number of organizations and Color Pack. So thinking about representation and the voices who are sitting on the board now, there is a lack of diversity. There's a lack of representation of educators and a lack of representation of folks who can connect the dots and move in a consensus building model. So after having those conversations, I sat down with a number of folks, sat down with people with Emerge Oregon and got enrolled into their class and started to have real conversations about what it would really take to run a campaign to do the work that PPS is missing. So thinking about those things truly started it, but I also really resonate with this quote, if not now, when, if not then who? So just thinking about putting myself in a position to advocate for the things that I know can happen that I do in my daily work. And it felt really empowering and to be trusted and tapped by folks who do this work for a living.
So could you give us your single priority to concentrate on the board that you think would move the dial on? Well, you've mentioned the audit and disparate outcomes for students. Is there one? Could you give us your top priority for how to make change?
Sure. So the top priority for me is actually closing that opportunity gap. Mm-hmm. But it's really hard. It's a tricky question because like any organism or any system, PPS is a large ecosystem. And so it's not just the outcomes for children that we're looking at, the lack of supports in the classroom, the lack of, services that are available to children that are struggling. But, there are multiple points at which, you could create this lever for change. So in terms of the achievement gap, I think just reframing it as an opportunity gap, because that's how I've been told, that puts the onus and the burden on the district and not on the children and the families. Excuse me, I work with the Housing Bureau, and with that work, affordable housing, I work with multiple community partners that are all sort of pulling in the same direction, that is to house people that are unhoused and to create homeowners and to help people that have been displaced from North and Northeast Portland return if they wish. So I've got a very robust network of supports, and I think that that Portland Public needs to look at bringing those supports in. Teachers know we need those supports, families know we need those supports, and I assume that the board and administration know that those supports are needed. So the challenge here is governing in an environment where there's not a lot of money and big problems to solve. But that would be my number one issue that I would want to work on.
But so you're saying that to address what you think it's better called the opportunity gap, the schools need supports from outside.
They need funding. They need supports from outside. They need,
What kind of supports are you talking about?
I'm talking about speech therapists, counselors, aides in classrooms, art teachers, music teachers, access to arts, access to outdoor education, outdoor recreation. The things that we know make well-rounded students and support teachers in doing the best job they can.
But it sounds
So that sounds like funding, like the schools need more funding for.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But it also sounds like you're suggesting that the semantics or the way that the issue is being described, if you describe it as an achievement gap, then you're essentially blaming the students. You're not doing as well as other students. Whereas if you describe it as an opportunity gap, you're focusing the blame or the accountability more on the district and the adults rather than the children.
Absolutely. I mean, so again, in this ecosystem where, the center of that ecosystem are the teachers and the students, we need to, as the adults in the ecosystem, be accountable for the outcomes that we're seeing and the outcomes that we've historically and persistently seen when it comes to Black and brown children.
Can I ask you another? I was recently, I don't know, I found myself on a dark corner of the internet about just people's experience of the districts and the board. I can't remember how many members of the board they were saying, but basically every board member who had a child in Portland Public Schools had at least at some point chosen a not their zone neighborhood school. What has been your experience of navigating the school district for your children? Have they gone to the neighborhood school, or have you chosen to send them to another program?
Sure. So currently I've got a son at Benson, which is not my neighborhood school. My older son graduated from Benson, not my neighborhood school. In my neighborhood, they gave us a choice of, I think it was 3 schools actually. As a single mother, knowing what the statistics are and outcomes for kids of single parent families, it's really important to me to choose the best options for my kids. I believe, so I attended many schools in my zone. My kids have also attended different schools, and they've attended different schools even kind of at the same time. I made decisions sometimes about their schools that that I made because of my single motherhood, that I didn't have support to drop them off or before school care or after school care. So in some cases, yes, I've sent them out of the neighborhood school, which, by the way, is the school my mother and grandmother retired from. My grandmother taught crochet at for years to little girls.
Which school is that?
I live in the King School, King Elementary. And of course, King Elementary has a Chinese immersion program now that wasn't there when my son was going to school several years ago.
So how do you think that informs your views of what the district should be concentrating on, directing resources to, that when for the reasons you said, you neighborhood school. How does that inform how you look at?
I'm not sure if I really understand your question. One thing, and I'm not an expert yet, I'm on a very steep learning curve. But as a parent, I've been involved for about 16 years, very directly. I'm at the counseling office at least once a week currently. There's the foundation system, which I don't know a lot about, but want to learn. I think is broken. Just from my own lived experience in the last month, I've gone to 2 school auctions. I should say,
Okay.
I've been involved in 2 school auctions.
Okay.
One I happened to run into at a Democratic fundraiser at the downtown Hilton a couple weeks ago. The ballroom right next to us was having a major blowout gala for an elementary school. The following Saturday, I went to my neighborhood elementary school auction, even though I don't have a child there, because I think it's important to support the neighborhood school and meet my neighbors and parents. And that was held in a free community room with beer and wine, no cocktails, and, heartfelt auction items, and very small take probably at the end of the night compared to the event that was held at the downtown Hilton. So that's disturbing to me. And if we use our racial equity plan as kind of a compass, if we use the budget as a compass and align that budget with the racial equity plan that's in place, then we'll start to see resources directed more where they're needed and less where they're not needed.
I guess, there's been a constant question about where to cap enrollment at Benson, because that's one way this comes into concrete form is they were gradually moving it up at one point, and there's been discussions of holding it down, and that comes into play as they consider how much to spend on a new high school. Do you have a view on what the enrollment should be for Benson?
No, I don't have a great view on that. It's something, of course, having 2 kids in the system, I'm very interested in. I'll look into this, but I don't have a view on the cap of how many students are there. I know that they're about 50% under-enrolled in terms of the capacity of the building.
We'll say we definitely need a staggering plan, as I think in a period of 5 years, there's a lot of things to come with this district, and the 2020 bond measure, for example, being a space where we can think about increasing the amount of folks who are at Benson. So right now there's 1,000 student cap at Benson, and it's a huge vehicle to creating a pipeline for success, careers, and college for a lot of students. And I want to see that at more than just Benson, but I imagine that we can definitely increase the enrollment size at Benson once we are further along in the development of other capital projects that will support holding space for really other critical programs like Access and Kairos and things that we hold.
Can I ask you both to list, the endorsement at this point that you're most proud of, that you want to highlight to us?
Absolutely. Am I able to also share really quickly my top priority too?
Sure.
I think what I've come to this work because of the impacts of the school to prison pipeline.
So actually, it wasn't top priority. It was like what you think should be the thing that you want to push on to change at.
Sure, and that's connected to this.
Okay.
So thinking about literacy supports, wraparound supports, strong retention efforts to keep folks in their positions and support issues of burnout, and thinking about restorative discipline practices, as those are things when invested in, we saw great results in a dramatic drop in suspensions and intentions that limit learning. So those 3 things are absolutely connected to what I'm going to be pushing as an elected school board member. And I can also transition to
Oh, sure.
the,
That's great.
if that's okay.
Sure.
So the one that I'm most proud of, I would have to say the APANO, it would be a tie between APANO and PCC's, Federation of Faculty and Academic Professionals and classified folks. But for APANO, I know that they are on the front lines working with communities, Pacific Islander communities and Asian communities, doing language justice work and advocating for family and medical leave to be more accessible. And I definitely value their work in just centering the voices of youth and students. And I know House Bill 2845, for example, had a large participation from youth who are connected with APANO, and I am invested in
2845 would lower the voting age to 16.
No, House Bill 2845 is the ethnic studies mandate, so that folks, other people were a part of that work to make it possible for sure. But just responding to why I'm proud of APANO, and I also work with Opal Environmental Justice. I'm currently on the board, but we are always in coalition and connection with each other, and as we think about strategy to advocate for student success in centering the voices who have always been pushed out and always been marginalized. I value being proud of their work, and it connects to my value for labor, just being proud of labor work, labor unions, and the impact that they do with getting the basic needs met of our educators and our staff. And I don't think that learning is possible until we address foundational needs and issues that day-to-day workers experience. So those are my most proud endorsements, if I have to choose one.
I have multiple endorsers, which I'll follow up with you by email, but elected labor unions. But the one that I'm most proud of is the Portland Association of Teachers. They're, again, in the ecosystem that we're discussing, a critical component of the schools and the system, and I'm really proud to have earned that one.
So let's ask the teachers union question. So the Oregonian has done a phenomenal job of highlighting some failings around a teacher who is abusing kids.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think should be done in a teacher's contract to address that systemically?
That's a great question. My values are around protecting kids. As a mother, when I send my kids to school, I want to know that they're safe, and that's safe from environmental hazards as well as bad actors. I don't know if I have a good question for that, but I think some of the accountability lies at the building level, at the administration level, and perhaps at some point would have to do with the contract level as well. But right now, if I'm an employer and I have someone in my building that's a bad actor, as the administrator, I need to have protocols in place where it's safe for students and teachers to report, and I need to take responsibility for the people that I've got in my building.
Yes, I also...
Is there anything in the contract that you would want to change?
In the
to
teacher's
address?
contract?
Yes.
Definitely. There hasn't really been any efforts or dedication to giving resources for curriculum development and professional development for teachers.
So sure, there's other things in the teacher's contract, but I just want to ask specifically, is there anything you want to change in the contract, the teacher's contract, to address like past failings around
Sure.
bad actors who've been allowed to move around the district?
Sure. I will say two things. I think accountability lies on talent and culture, as they call it, or our HR office. But I think unions play an important and pivotal role with making sure the rights of workers are protected. But I also think when harm is being perpetuated, when there's hostile environments that are being perpetuated, that folks need to be held accountable. So I am not in favor of protecting an employee who needs to receive some follow-up repercussions or be accountable to harm that they are placing on students and making unsafe environments in the classroom. So in terms of changing the contract, I would definitely be invested in creating language that could support making sure that students are safe and protected regardless of what goes down, and if a teacher perpetuates that harm or trauma, that it's not about that due process can be protected, but it's absolutely not going to be something that's more important than upholding an environment that's not safe for students.
I want to follow on. So you talked about the Oregonians reporting of that incident, and I actually pulled a quote out that says, Bethany Barnes said, Portland Public Schools fielded report after report that the educator engaged in sexual misconduct. District officials' failure to stop him and the district's lack of improvement in training and protocols indicates an urgent need for Oregon's largest school district to overhaul how it handles misconduct. So the reporting is putting the burden on the administration, and I believe that the Portland Teachers Union hadn't even quite heard of it because the system wasn't set up to report what had happened. There was no way for them. It didn't get to that point. In other words,
there's a specific question about how they retain their disciplinary records. It's open for their contracts. So I was sort of asking if you all had views.
Yeah, I don't. If you're speaking to if they transfer to a different school, being able to wipe basically that slate clean, I don't support that.
So you mentioned safety of the school buildings. Do you have a view on how schools should be prioritized for the next bond? Portland Public Schools has been operating like the plan in place was to go high school by high school and then work the way down. I actually don't know what happens after high schools for overhauling all the schools. Do you have a view on whether that program should continue, whether high schools should continue to be the priority in the next bond, or whether schools should be prioritized based on some kind of safety measure?
That's an excellent question. I have a background in facilities and construction management, and there's a lot of work happening. You've heard about earthquake preparedness, but we have 81 schools in the district, and they should all be prioritized, and they're all very old, as a matter of fact. A lot of them are not built to withstand the type of earthquake that we're planning for. So I think that's
half of them are unreinforced masonry, which is
it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So
including Benson, which they didn't even prioritize within this bond.
So I don't know yet what the priority order is. I need to dig into that a little bit more, what the criteria they use to select the schools.
I know that there is an investment in thinking about middle schools too for this upcoming bond and finishing the work that we couldn't do with the last one. And also Cleveland and Jefferson being spaces that are able to have redevelopment and new resources from the bond. I'm very invested in seeing community benefit agreements before anything gets on the ballot. And that is definitely mirroring my leadership style, but thinking about minority-owned businesses, students, parents, educators, and folks who have direct stake in how all these things are going to be changing, facility staff and the folks who are supporting that work, and people who are actually doing the capital projects to come together and create standards on how they're going to navigate the process and prioritize the schools that they're going to focus on in together in coalition. And that way it's not the district saying, here's what we're doing and here's why, but there is a conversation where everybody's at the table elevating and uplifting the needs that have been neglected due to under-resourcing and underfunding. But those community benefit agreements, I think, are going to be key and critical when we get into these high-stakes conversations around where are we going to focus all these resources and money, and that way people have a say, and that influences what the results are.
Have you two appeared in other joint forums together?
Yeah.
There's been quite a few.
We're like,
Awesome. So you're very familiar with each other's platforms and with each other's backgrounds. So I'd like you to, and you presented some obvious differences and choices for us. So I'd like you to each take about a minute and tell us why you were the better candidate. You're both good candidates. Tell us why you're better. Denise will go first with you.
Absolutely. So I've dedicated my life and trajectory to spending every day with students and supporting student retention work. And as I think about policy that shapes programming, policy for conduct, policy that shapes restorative efforts, compliance and response around interpersonal violence, and Title IX, I think connecting that with being a young candidate who's on the front lines with students puts me in a position that brings something that the board doesn't have. When we talk about changing the status quo, we definitely need to disrupt the norms that we usually see. And I think it's powerful, too. I want to name that how people are activated in this community to advocate for themselves, speak up for what's happening, and I want to continue to invest and pour into the student communities and parent communities and educator communities, but then build a bridge to connect all of those needs into a unified vision. I think we deserve a change and to see a board member who's accountable and transparent to the stakeholders, our main stakeholders that we serve, and prioritizes that in the way that governance practices are taking place. I think to support me, what I would say would be directly connecting to an effort to unify our staff, empower our students, and uplift the work towards moving towards stability for our district.
Great. Michelle, why would you be the better?
I'm the better candidate because I've lived here a long time. I'm very well, I'm invested so much in the city and in the community that I live in. I have years of experience inside the schools as a child and as a daughter and granddaughter of educators and as a parent. I understand how Portland works at this stage. I think that I bring, a mature perspective, especially in terms of my own personal conduct once I am elected, if I'm lucky to be so, and I'm invested in outcomes for the kids, for our future, basically. I'm invested here. I live here. I have deep experience in various leadership roles as a volunteer and want to apply that to the betterment of our district overall.
So I was going to ask a variation of Nigel's question if you all had been together. It's like, are there any particular positions or policy positions that you think differentiates you from your opponent in this race? Like, is there something that you fundamentally disagree on the issues?
I'll speak for myself. I don't think there's any fundamental differences. I will say something I'm pushing forward that isn't available from any other candidate is a strong dedication to restorative justice practice. And I think about what's existed in the district before that's been cut. But
Like
even
what?
with a restorative justice coordinators who supported students. But even before that, we had efforts that put another layer in the discipline process where we would have to connect with other staff after a suspension was basically initiated. And that effort to have a more comprehensive conversation about the incidents led to dropping 50% in suspensions.
That's been cut?
The effort got a lot of pushback from folks in the district, and it's going to require onboarding and a specific unified vision around addressing bias and having different approaches to serving disruptive students. And so those things, and also folks weren't suspended under the age of 7 for a time period. And I think diverting our efforts to building skill development.
So they're suspending kids again under 7?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
So that's just a little
Let's
bit.
talk later about that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a policy difference that a fundamental policy difference you have with your?
I guess I kind of made a promise to myself to focus on the strengths that we both bring.
Fine, so you don't have to answer, but like voters are looking for differences when they look at candidates. Like, you know,
Sure.
like, I mean,
They
it's
are.
a nonpartisan race, right? I mean, we want to know what your differences are and what they're voting for. So you don't have to answer, but that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't think I'll answer that
Pass.
because, yeah, I'm going to pass
Okay.
on that one.
All right.
We'll try that one more time. Would either of you like to ask your opponent a question? And welcome to pass, and it could be, you know, how'd you get here today? Or it could be, we're often
Actually-
looking for you to help us understand the differences. So, Michelle, would you like to ask Shanice a question?
I don't know if I have a question for her prepared. I probably should have, considering this exercise last go round. But how is the campaign treating you?
Mm-hmm.
How are people treating you?
Mm-hmm.
How is this community treating you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This whole experience has been a wild ride, I would say, and working full time. I've mentioned to you, like, I'm trying to take a vacation day here and there to alleviate some of that weight. But yeah, 14-hour days, starting before work, during lunch breaks, and after work, canvassing, door knocking, doing house parties. I think being a Black woman in this race has provided a lot of things for me to reflect on in terms of how people treat me and how people see me and how folks are responding to just dynamics and layers. And I think that Blackness is not a monolith, and we have so much diversity in the diaspora and have so much strength and positive things to offer, and there isn't the same thing going on. Like, I think we've had this conversation in private before with when two white candidates run against each other. It's not, doesn't feel hot, right? So I think doing that and just keeping up my day to day. I've got at the end of the year, as an educator, we're preparing for students to graduate. I'm trying to find student leaders to transition into different roles. And so I get pieces that fill my cup all along the way, but wow, it's a tiring process.
I think the question's interesting too, also just with that lens that, you know, we're being asked why we're different. I mean, we're very different people. We're different ages, we have different educational backgrounds, we have different, you know, length of time. But rather than allowing the voters to concentrate on that and what they're seeing on film and what they're seeing in forums, you're asking us to, you know, differentiate. In other words, it's as if a voter couldn't make their mind up otherwise. And so that's the part of being a Black candidate that's I find very challenging here. So we're very different people. Just, I mean, in general, and it would be, very different from anybody else that I'm sitting next to as well.
Would you like to ask your opponent a question?
I want to actually just name and recognize that this question is, I think it's causing some implications, and I want to be mindful because I do care about Michelle as a person, and I respect you. I think that you've done amazing work in this community and bring forward things that the board needs too. We're still going to have one person of color sitting on that table regardless, and my goal is to hold space in community as a Black candidate, and also center the things that I bring. So I just wanted to name that, yes, there is some stuff I think that I would want to respect in regards to what that would mean, asking a question. But yeah, hopefully.
So that's a no. If you're curious about our past interviews with candidates, they're all online for you to check out.
Yeah, we've seen them.
Particularly the Joanne Hardesty, Loretta Smith race. That question in that interview resulted in rather interesting results. If you're interested in some relatively good TV for these endorsement interviews that are usually watched by very few people. But at the end of our interviews, we always ask a lighthearted question. It's supposed to give our viewers and us like a different sense of yourselves. If you, so this year's
question, which we've only asked once, so Rachel's trying to remember what we agreed on. This year's question that we're asking of all candidates, not just you two, all candidates, is what experience did you have with a school lunch that was a positive experience?
Your favorite school lunch, right?
It could be in school, it could have been, I couldn't eat the school lunch. One candidate said, I basically said, I never ate the school lunch, but when I went to PCC, I had a great bacon and egg sandwich every day for $1. So
best school lunch.
I didn't have great school lunch. I remember getting food poisoning from school lunch. My parents are from Jamaica, and they would give me or make me lunch when they could. And those moments where I had curry chicken, pea stew, steamed cabbage, that was what I loved. I remember a lot of corn dogs and chocolate milk.
Wow. So
so corn dogs and chocolate milk.
Taking your lunch from home sounds like your best.
Yeah, taking a lunch from home at the time was a better option.
Okay.
I went to a lot of different schools in my life just due to, traveling around and being unstable when we were in Portland. And as the daughter of a lifelong health food nut, I actually enjoyed going to school and having processed food. We didn't get it at home. So like the spaghetti that was all like mushed together, I really enjoyed that. Everything my mother made had some crunch to it. It was homemade and it was healthy and it had kale in it, even before kale was popular. So I liked the processed food. I was, I'll never forget my first TV dinner, but the school, I liked the processed food.
Cool. Well, thank you both for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.